Okay.
But they said it's good to have a little problem.
Well, you know, who's they?
Actually, it shows it's working. That's what that little paper was saying.
Oh, okay.
That's not bad to have some problems.
Yeah.
Mine was just a headache. Just couldn't seem to get rid of the headache.
Oh, okay. Anything but a headache.
You sound like my husband.
Yeah, I used to have migraines, but I haven't had them in 30 some years, but anything but a headache.
Oh, we're just about at 3 o'clock. I apologize for all the different emails today. I use the cheap Zoom, and apparently you can't record from an outside source on that. So that's the reason we had to make the change.
Okay.
And I know we have some other people that are going to be joining us or supposed to. How's the weather down there? I just chose to work remote today because I didn't want to be on the interstate.
It's real cloudy and drizzling a little on my side of town.
Yeah, we've had sun in and out all day today.
Well, the wind is really getting strong here right now. So I'm thinking the line must be pushing in.
Now, where are you at?
I'm in Rock Hill. I drive from Rock Hill every day.
Okay, yeah, I was just looking at the national weather forecast and it shows the line at an angle. Yeah, heading that way.
Mr. Malinowski or Ms. McBride, I know that we weren't sure about your attendance today. So Ms. Newton had said that she would be happy to preside, or would one of you like to?
Well, it's fine. If you call the meeting, I don't know why we need anybody to preside, but we'll be glad.
The legal tells us that we need to because we have too many of us together, and I really appreciate everybody being here.
Okay, it's just like a training. Okay, so I will call the governmental. Well, actually,
Ms. Newton just joined the meeting.
No, I'm fine. However you had it set up, just go ahead. I'm here in attendance. Go right ahead.
All right. Ms. Newton, if you wouldn't mind then, would you call us to order and get us started here, please?
Sure, happy to do that. Do we actually have a quorum though at this point?
Let's see, just 1 second.
I don't see why we need it. I'm really confused over this, Mr. Malinowski.
Yeah, I don't see why we need a quorum.
We don't need a quorum.
I thought it was more.
Oh, no, that's what requires us to call the meeting to order, et cetera, but that's okay. I hereby call this governmental budget process overview meeting for March 18th, 2021 to order. The first item of business on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda, and I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Now wait a minute, point of order. Here's where I'll say if we don't have a quorum, we can't call the meeting to order, but we can continue with a work session type matter here.
Right.
I can't see everyone.
Best thing to do to.
I don't believe we do have a quorum at this point.
Let's have Ms. Black call the roll and then you'll know.
This doesn't seem right to me. Something's wrong with this, but okay, if legal says so, but it doesn't seem right.
All right, you like me to call a roll?
Please.
Yes. Malinowski.
Here.
Pugh. McBride.
Here.
Livingston. Teratio. Joe Walker. Barron. Overture Walker. Mackey.
Here.
English.
Here.
Newton.
Here.
All right, we do not have a quorum.
Can you guys
Mr.
just join?
Mr. Ratio?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Mr. Ratio's connecting.
Miss English, were you asking if we could hear you?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not seeing everybody on my gallery, but I can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
When I'm looking at this thing and it says participants, my video doesn't seem to be working. That's why I was asking.
I can see you. Well, never mind. I could.
All right. And for the roll, Mr. Ratio, are you here?
I am here.
All right. All right. We have 6 people. You now have a quorum.
With
Okay,
that in mind, the meeting has been called to order. The first item of business on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda, and I'll entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to adopt the agenda. Ms. Black, will you call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Malinowski,
Yes.
Pugh, McBride,
Yes.
Livingston, Teratio,
Yes.
Joe Walker, Barron, Overture Walker, Mackey,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passed.
That brings us to the third item of business, the presentation and discussion, which will be led by Assistant County Administrator Lori Thomas and Budget Director James Hayes.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. I appreciate the introduction and the help with this. And to each and every one of you members and staff members that are here with us today, we appreciate your time and attendance. We know that the weather is set to get a little, or has the potential to become a little treacherous soon. So I won't belabor this and we'll move on through and talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. This is strictly a training, and many of you are old pros at this, but we have lots of new members, and we thought that we'd like to give you an idea of what you can expect during this process as we work through this over the next few months. So the format today is we're going to be providing you with information about our process. We'd like for it to be interactive. So if you have questions, please feel free to just ask those questions at any time. This is your meeting. It's not meant for us to just sit and talk about. So please feel free to ask anything that you'd like to have clarity on. It's very flexible. So if there's something that you think about after we move on from one slide to another and you'd like to have us move back, we will. We're recording this also so that we can make sure that we get all of the takeaways from the meeting to be able to answer any questions as we work into our other training opportunities and our workshops as we actually vet our proposed budget for 2022-2023. So first, to just sort of give you an idea of the governmental budget process and why we do actually do this every year. The state statute requires that every local government organization have an annual budget to be approved It has to be approved prior to the beginning of your fiscal year, which with our case is July the 1st. So we begin actually bringing our approval process to you in the form of the public meetings in May. All budget meetings have to be public meetings, and the county must provide written notice of the meeting at an agenda. The written notice has to be in an agenda format posted to the public at least 24 hours before the meeting in the building in which the meeting is to be held, and in all other social media websites, and notifying to the press as well. Before adopting the annual budget, the council must conduct a budget hearing. Ours will be done during the second reading in May. We have to give notice 15 days in writing of the public hearing. This is also dictated by state code. The state law requires a public hearing and an ordinance approved by a positive majority vote of the council to impose any new service fees. This does not, however, require us to have a public hearing regarding an increase or a decrease to an existing fee, but any new fee that might be introduced would require a public hearing. A positive majority is a majority of the total members of the council, not a majority of a quorum. General budget discussions do not qualify for executive session, so we have to have all of these conversations in public. So budget calculations are a very important piece of how we do our process. Of course, probably the single largest, or actually the single largest form of revenue that we have to support our government is property taxes. And the Office of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office actually governs how that is to be managed. As you know, Act 388, which taps our millage, holds a great deal of influence over the amount of property tax that we can raise by changing millage, and actually restricts the millage, the increase that we can have. There is a calculation that you have to do based upon CPI and population each year that restricts the amount of, that gives you the maximum amount of millage increase. And if you don't use that increase in a given year, the clawback period is a maximum of 3 years. So you could never go back and recruit millage that you had not taken at the time that it was allocated. Also, we are a local government that has a local option sales tax. So we also have to calculate what the loss credit is against property taxes going into that budget season as well. Reassessment pays a big deal, and we reassess every 5 years. The last one was in 2019, so we won't have another reassessment until 2024 at this point, or we aren't anticipated to. If reassessment were to actually increase property values beyond a certain excess, we would have to do a rollback millage to be able to be in compliance with state statutes.
Lori,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat those dates again? I missed the last part. You said we're not scheduled for the next reassessment until what year?
2024.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Lori, just to interject, sorry. We actually had last year, it was tax year 2020. That was actually a reassessment year. Last year, the county auditor and county assessor. So last year was a reassessment year, and we rolled the millage back. So the next one should be 2025, unless they were off. But they actually had a reassessment for Richland County. That was actually last year.
So they assessed in 19 and actually published the rates in 20,
that's
correct?
That's correct.
So they will assess in 24, but not actually change the rates until 25, Ms. Mackey, to clarify that.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Here is our 2020 millage schedule. Any of you who participated in Jeff Rubel's sessions on economic development have seen this. As you know, county millage is not the only thing that Richland County citizens see on their tax rolls. They also see school taxes, and they also see any municipal taxes that may be applicable to their given areas. It's a chart that it's required and we need it, but boy, can it be confusing to the average citizen. So this is just a chart for you to have for I would recommend if somebody asks you about the millage, this is just the best place to refer them to, is to our millage schedule. So budgeting best practices. As we said back in January to you when we talked to you, we want to actually make sure that we adhere to the standards which all of the governing best practices, or the governing associations and the agencies that we rely on to give us guidance, to help us to plan and have the best budget possible for our community. So just to talk through a few of the best practices. First is that the process is key. It has to be well structured, well organized, and executed to plan and implement correctly. And it's a team effort. James and his staff started working on this in October to actually produce this budget that will go into effect in June. So as you can see, there's very little time between the time that we actually complete one budget and the time that we begin planning for another. The second is that the most important step to a successful budget is for council to agree up front on the process. Many of you have been working with this process for several years, but we're hoping that this gives you a little more insight into what the process is, and for you to be able to communicate that to any of your citizens and to ask us any questions about our process that you would like to know. The next point is that a detailed budgeted calendar is the most important budget tool to stick to and to make sure that you are adopted in a timely manner. As you know, we've proposed to you a budget calendar, and we will actually be taking that for approval to the Administration and Finance Committee next Tuesday night. If approved there, it will come to full council for adoption or consideration on the April 6th meeting. And at that point, we would have a set calendar. Our goals next year might be to move that forward a little bit so that everybody has a little more time, but we had a real turnover in council this year. And we'd like, we're getting that to you now, and we'll move forward with moving it a little bit earlier in the year in the budget process. This one, the next one sort of makes me laugh. It says that the process should start a minimum of 3 months in advance of the budget. That's for a really small organization, but most entities begin about 6 months beforehand. Right now, it takes us 8 months to put our process into place. And one thing that we feel is very important also is community and citizen engagement. And the earlier you start that process, the better chance it is that citizens understand what a budget actually does and how you plan to expend their dollars, and that they feel like they can actually be a part of guiding the direction of the organization. And we have a council administrator form of government, and in our form of government, the council administrator is charged with preparing the budget for council's consideration. So when the budget comes before council, it will be coming from Administrator Brown. A prioritized list of council goals can help in making decisions on how to allocate scarce resource. So as we move through these processes going forward in coming years, it may be that council chooses to set some sort of a plan for moving forward, a vision, if you will, to actually guide us through this process so that we can make sure that the resources are allocated appropriately. We feel like to this point, we've done a really good, that you guys have done a really good job, and we appreciate that, but that we would like to offer that opportunity for you all to think about further discussions in that area. Staff can expedite budget forecasting by maintaining a detailed historical records of revenue and expenditures. And James is going to speak to that very soon. In this process, this particular year, we actually went back and looked at 5 years of historical expenditures and revenues to make sure that our projections are as accurate as possible. And that is a budget best practice. To avoid unexpected problems, we suggest that we carefully examine prior years to make sure that we adjust for any one-time revenues, such as grants or collections of a past due revenue, so that we don't consider that as a recurring revenue. The worst mistake, or one of the worst mistakes that you can make, is to actually use non-recurring revenue to budget for recurring expenses. You probably recognize this slide also from January.
Lori?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Can we go back to the previous slide real quick?
Yes.
So, I mean, I understand best practices and, looking at historical records to kind of account for a plan for revenue and expenditures. But when we are kind of coming out of a year like none other, where we just experienced the pandemic, and you're looking at prior history, what does that play into your budget projections for next year?
That's a very good question. And I think I can give you a really good example of what we did for planning for 2022. We did an analysis of 5 years. However, we placed less weight on FY20 because FY20 pretty much saw 4 months where we were in non-traditional operating mode. So we actually placed more focus on 2019 and 18 as fiscal years as we looked at those 5 years, because we realized that 2020 was impacted significantly by COVID. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to briefly address the prioritization list of council. That is supposed to be a part of our strategic plan where we set priorities. Unfortunately, we were not able to do that during our strategic planning session. And I was hoping that the council would at least have some opportunity to present its priorities. I'm just throwing that out as a statement.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't expect you to respond to it. I'm just putting that out as a statement that we as a council must address. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. Glad to have your support. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll move on. You probably recognize this slide from January. This is the Government Finance Officer's Budgeting Best Practices. It says that the budget must fit the statutory definition of a budget, of a balanced budget. It's very easy to produce a balanced budget using all cash available, that being current revenues as well as a portion of fund balance. That is a balanced budget as long as you can balance it. However, it may not be a financially sustainable balanced budget. A financially sustainable balanced budget actually matches the annual expenditures to the annual revenues. And that's where we're trying to develop a plan to make certain that we're able to present something to council that achieves that goal. So as I said, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what it takes from a process side for staff to actually present council with a proposed budget.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes.
Thank you. This is Shaquille Newton. We have suddenly started to hear an echo in your presentation, which is probably because some non-speakers don't have their lines muted, and so we're hearing the echo. So I'm going to just ask if everyone who's not speaking wouldn't mind making sure that they're muted. I think we could be able to handle that. Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Okay. Thank you very much. I couldn't hear that from my end, but I appreciate that. Thanks so much, and thank you for whomever was able to mute themselves. So 8 months prior to June, in October, Mr. Hayes was gathering information and compiling all of the data necessary to be able to roll out budget baselines to the departments to get feedback from them. Actual budget requests were due back to the budget office in December. And from just after the Christmas holidays until the end of January, Director Hayes and his staff were compiling all of the information from the departments to actually present documents that allowed us as a budget and administration team to meet with each and every department and the elected and appointed officials' offices to talk about their request, to provide feedback, and to actually go walk away with an idea of what would be the best scenario for the council, asking them to make some adjustments either from their side or us taking away items to try to address as requests. That took 3 full weeks of meetings. And we did that. We tried to do those in person because we felt like they would be best. And we all wore masks. And by the end of the time, by the end of every week, we were ready to have a break on the weekends. So I appreciated all of the work of the departments and the staff to make that happen and actually bring the process sort of full circle for everyone to have an opportunity to come to the table and talk about their needs. We also we're right now recognizing and addressing the limitations. Unfortunately, we don't have enough resources probably to meet everyone's requests. And so we are also working on prioritizing those requests and coming up with a document that will come to administration the first week of April for review. One of the big takeaways from our process of recognizing and addressing the limitations and talking with the departments was the fact that during that time, Administrator Brown addressed every department and let them know that there are going to be decisions that are going to have to be made to fund or not fund certain priorities. However, if they're not satisfied with, and we will be communicating those to the departments as well at the time that we actually present the budget proposal to council. If any one of these groups does not agree with the priorities that we set, they have been instructed that during our budget workshops, they could come and make their wishes to council known and express their desires and and their needs to let council make that decision on funding. So we feel like it's been a very interactive process, and that everyone should feel as though they'll be able to have input into the process. After administration review, yes, ma'am, Ms. Newton.
Thank you. Regarding what you just mentioned in terms of staff having questions about priorities, I guess my request would be, and you may plan on doing this anyway, that if you know that people are planning on coming to present to us, that we have that information in advance. And then also, if it's not too complicated, and we can talk about this offline, it's always challenging for me when someone requests, let's say, $100 in their budget, and then administration proposes $10 in their budget, because I don't see the original request and I'm not asking to do that. It's hard for me to understand what is being sacrificed by that discrepancy, because obviously there is some priority that their department had that we're not addressing. If it's simple to like include in your recommendation, department requested $100, we're providing, $10, we're not going to fund the Acme widget project, but we feel like it's okay to delay. That's information that might be helpful for me if there are a lot of discrepancies, and there may not be, but I just know there was one year where it seemed like everyone had requested twice as much as was allocated. And if I'd had more information about what was being deferred, it would have made me feel better about the decisions that I was making.
Yes, ma'am, we can certainly work toward that. I'll be honest with you, I've not seen what comes out in the budget document, but we can certainly work toward having something so that, especially number one is to find out if someone does plan to come and to address council, to make sure that you have that information, and to also try to let you know those areas where there were where funds may not have been fully recognized to fund projects. Does that answer your question?
It does, thanks. And I think Mr. Malinowski wanted to be recognized.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Newton, Ms. Thomas. I'm quite the opposite. I kind of take the approach that if the administrator and his staff have the opportunity to review the line items for the budget that the departments are putting in, they're in a much better position to know, based on past performance and projected, whether or not they do need all of those funds. And if they say you only need $10 and not $100, I'm not going to question that so much as I am on the converse side of that. When the department asks for $100 and the administrator says, no, we're going to give you $150 as a recommendation, that's where I start to get confused, wondering, well, they only needed this much. Why are we offering more?
I appreciate that, but I can probably tell you there's not going to be many of them. There won't be any of those.
Okay.
Ms. Thomas and Mr. Malinowski, if I could respond, and just to be clear, it's not so that I can counter say what administration is saying, but there was just this one year where it was so extraordinary that if, for example, there's a department that felt like, if our Department of Public Works, just picking them out of a hat, felt like they needed a 50% increase in staff so that we could really handle what the road issues are in the county, I certainly want to, defer to the administrator. But sometimes, theoretically, budget requests should represent priorities and real needs. And so it just helps me to understand that. But that's certainly something that I can take offline. And it's just that one year, it was so extreme that everybody did it. I just wanted to understand, what in the world are we not doing for the county if we're funding at this level? But I'm happy to take that offline, and I don't want to cause a bunch of rigmarole. So thanks.
I think this is great conversation. I think these are the kind of conversations that we do want to have. We need this feedback before we actually send a document to you. And certainly, if we're able to align the priorities as we move with the budget presentation, it will make a much smoother process for you as council, and for us to react as staff too. So the more conversation we have about it, the better, and I appreciate that. But yes, Ms. Newton, we can certainly talk about what might be an appropriate document that you might want to see in some of those instances offline, if you're okay with that. Ms. McBride, I saw your hand up, or were you just, did you have a question?
Okay, I was supporting Ms. Newton with her statement, because sometimes if there is a significant difference in the request from the governmental entity and the administration, I would like to know why, knowing why that the initial request too. That way I can see for myself. So I'm just supporting what Ms. Newton stated.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. I appreciate that. Okay, any other questions? Okay, and as I said, there will come to council with you will receive your recommended budget documents on April the 9th this year. Once we get that document to you, we'll have 4 training opportunities to bring familiarity to the process. This is the first of those 4. This one's a general overview. The other 3 will focus specifically on funds, one being the general fund, the other being enterprise funds, and then the last being special revenue funds. If there's anything else that's needed during that time, we'll certainly be able to address it and make sure that we set up an appropriate venue to be able to have those conversations, or you're welcome to contact myself or Director Hayes, and we'll be happy to have those conversations with you as well. We have 4 workshop opportunities coming to review the recommendations by fund and to address issues. Those are on the proposed budget calendar that will be in your packet, or that will be going to the administration and finance team on Tuesday, the committee rather, on Tuesday. And then your budget readings will be on May the 4th, May the 20th, which will also be the public hearing, and then on June the 3rd as a final reading. We do have a cushion in there for the June 20th meeting in case there's any delays and we need to move about any processes. Any questions? With that, I'm going to turn it over to James Hayes. And James, if you'll tell me when to flip slides, I'll be happy to drive this for you. And he's going to talk to you about the actual nuts and bolts of putting together the numbers. James? Yes, sir, Mr. Malinowski?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Thomas. I do have one question before we leave with you. And you had indicated in there that May 20th, you said public hearing. Is that also the second reading?
Yes, sir, it will be.
Okay, I know in the past we kind of went away from having both on the same day, because many times the public hearing, we get dozens of people coming in to speak, and it's a rather lengthy meeting to begin with, and therefore we would have the public hearing separately just to hear the public, and then a second reading, because there's usually discussion on these different readings about the budget. But I just throw that out there.
Okay.
I actually think, excuse me, if I'm going off memory, but I think the second reading is on the 20th. I think the public hearing is May 27th, but on the budget calendar, it is separate. I think it's May 20th for the second reading and May 27th for the public hearing, but we do have them separated, Councilman Malinowski.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that correction, James. James?
Okay, well, we'll get started here. Revenues. So revenues are obviously the core critical to the budget process. Matter of fact, if I'm being quite honest with you, they are the most critical driver of the budget process, because it determines what you're actually able to do. So me and my staff spend a lot of time, as Lori mentioned, going back to October. We started looking at the revenues, and obviously as time goes on, we get deeper and deeper into it. Matter of fact, this is the critical time for revenue projections after December, because again, in order for you to be able to know what you can fund, you got to know what revenues you have available. We look at historical data, and we do some projections. We also get information in from the county auditor, especially as it relates to property tax revenue, who in turn gets information from the assessor's office, because for Richland County, I think roughly 65% of our tax base is real estate. I would have to verify that number, but again, this is a huge portion of our tax base. And of course, we also have information from the treasurer's office and the finance office. So there's a lot of moving parts go into budget projections. For the general fund, our growth has been inconsistent at times. What I mean by that, let me clarify, is that some years it may be a higher number because of mitigating factors in a particular year than it is in others. But on average, it is less than 2%. Matter of fact, from FY19 to FY20 was even smaller than that. It grew by roughly almost 1%. So it is very important that we have accurate revenue projections so that we can have numbers to put in place for the budget. For the enterprise funds, again, look at historical data and the growth rate of these items. Special revenue funds, which again get their name because they come from a special source that must be used for a specific purpose. And those things are very identifiable. You know, we'll talk a little bit more later on about some of the special revenue funds. But again, as I mentioned, communication plays a tremendous role. Again, a lot of offices are involved in it, you know, from the county assessor, from the county auditor, from the finance office, from the treasurer's office, of course, from budget and grants. And one of the key takeaways is this: it's important to know whether or not revenue is recurring or non-recurring. As Lori mentioned before, in order to build not only a balanced budget, but a budget that is structurally in place, you need to have your expenditures tied to recurring revenue. So it's important to know for us to identify what are the recurring revenue sources versus something that may have been received only one time. Next slide, please.
Mr. Hayes.
Yes.
On the other slide, you spoke about the general funds, the enterprise funds, and the special revenue funds.
Yes,
Are you
ma'am.
going to give a brief explanation of each one of those
Yes,
in your
ma'am.
presentation to come? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. In the right. So in the subsequent slides, we're going to talk a little bit about the different type of funds that the departments have, that the county has. And I was going to give a brief description of each, but yes, ma'am.
Are those three? Okay, thank you. All right.
Yes, ma'am. Any more questions? Okay, so I'll move forward on expenditure. Now, the other side, of course, of the equation, if you will, when you're building a budget is expenditure.
James, just one sec. I think we might need everyone to mute their cells if they're not speaking. Getting a little bit of vibration. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, the other side of the equation, besides the revenue, of course, is expenditures. We look at trend analysis. Matter of fact, Lori mentioned earlier, we went back when we sat down with departments. We didn't just look at FY20. We know FY20 was a different kind of year because of COVID. We went all the way back to FY17 to show departments, what is your trend? What have you been spending over the last year? Because what we're trying to do is push the budget toward budgeting to actual as opposed to budget. That's why the line one on the slide is so important. Even though here historical data is important, it's also more important that we look at expenditures on an annual basis to see what's actually really going on. And the reason why that's important, we found that a lot of departments have had funds budgeted in a certain line item, but they really have not been expending it on items that were germane to that line item. They've done a lot of budget transfers where they use. So what we're trying to do is make the budget more in line to what's actually going on. That's why we've asked departments to put the resources in your request to where you actually have the need. Another part, of course, obviously, is whether or not an expenditure is recurring or non-recurring. And of course, obviously, your biggest recurring expenditure, of course, is personnel costs. Operating expenditures have typically been recurring in terms of we typically budget for them, but again, they don't have to be. They can be non-recurring. You can reduce a department's operating expenditures such as office supplies, but typically, of course, you cannot reduce their personnel expenditures. Next slide. This is what I was talking about, Vice Councilwoman McBride. We're going to talk a little bit about the different funds that we have. Of course, the largest fund, or what I call our day-to-day fund, is the general fund. And of course, the largest percentage of revenue from that comes from property taxes. Our enterprise funds are, of course, our business-like, which more closely resembles our private enterprise. And that'd be, of course, our utilities, solid waste, and we have a third smaller enterprise fund, our airport fund. We have the special revenue funds, which again, as I mentioned, they get the name because they come from a special source of revenue, and it must be used for a specific purpose. The county also has two other types of funds that are not listed here that do go before council. And of course, those are debt service funds, which we use to repay for items that we have borrowed, but not only for the county, but of course, the millage agencies have debt service. All that flows through the county treasurer. And then of course, there are the millage agency funds. We have, I think, about 6 or 7 different millage agencies, the school districts, zoo and library. All of those items, of course, come before council as well, but they do not originate from the county. We get the request in from the millage agencies, and of course, they go to before council to be considered. Another type of funds we have, of course, are grant funds. I know Councilwoman McBride is very familiar with that, with her grant background. And of course, these funds help the county because we have very limited resources. So grant funds are core critical to help us get items funded that we don't have the dollars ourselves to fund. One of the takeaways from this slide is that funds cannot be commingled. In other words, you can't put enterprise funds in the general fund, can't put special revenue funds in grant funds. So these items must be separated and accounted for separately. I'll stop there for a moment if anybody got any questions.
Yes, could you give an example? And I know we've talked about it before, but the special revenue funds.
Yeah, and that's going to be, I think, on a subsequent slide. I think if that's the next slide, Lauren. But an example of a special revenue fund would, of course, be. Can you hear me? Excuse me, am I being heard?
We can hear you, Mr.
Yes.
Hayes.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, but an example of a special revenue fund would, of course, be like victim assistance. Victim assistance is a special revenue fund. Public defender is another one. You see, we have a whole host of them. Road maintenance is probably one that you are familiar with. Those funds come from, as I mentioned, come from a special source. That's the road maintenance fee on the tax bill, and they must be used for a specific purpose. We cannot use road maintenance fund to fund items in the general fund. We can only use road maintenance funds to fund road maintenance activities. So that's why it's counted for in a separate fund. Economic development is another. So there are several different special revenue funds.
James?
Yes.
I've posted the list of the special revenue funds there. And then once you're finished with that, Ms. Newton, I believe, has a question also.
I'm sorry, repeat that, Laura. I didn't hear you.
I said I've posted the special revenue fund slide. And once you've gone through, once people are done with that, I think Ms. Newton also has a question.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I'm ready for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. My question is a request, and it may not be for you. It may be more for Administrator Brown regarding our enterprise funds is, of course, for our enterprise funds, the idea is that they are self-sustaining, and there are some areas where we haven't been able to do that. There are some areas that have been problematic. Recently, I know we talked about the recycling and things in that area. I do think it's important that we get to the true purpose of those funds. And so whether it's a part of this budget process or a corollary to this budget process, I will be very interested to see an analysis and plan in terms of how we're going to address that moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll let Laura chime in some, but we actually have begun to have conversations with Director Maloney for solid waste and Director Bill Davis with utilities, because you're correct. Historically, these funds have not been self-sustaining as they need to be. And Lori and C.A. Brown have begun to have some very open conversation with these departments to see what it takes to get us on the right footing. But yes, ma'am, that certainly is something that we've begun and we're going to delve into further. But yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown, did you want to respond?
No, Mr. Hayes covered it. I think that's the information Ms. Newton was looking for, and he hit the nail on the head, and we will be bringing that information to the attention of the body with recommendations for how to address it.
Okay, James, want to move on to the general fund?
Okay, so thank you so much, Lori. So the general fund has several different types of property revenue categories. Property tax is the largest single source, but we have other ones, fee in lieu, which of course is related to property tax. And for those who are maybe not be familiar with that term, fee in lieu of taxes, as you all see during the council meeting, when an entity or organization petitions the county to be in order to do certain incentives, they get a fee in lieu of taxes. That's kind of oxymoron because they're still paying property taxes, but instead of paying the ad valorem tax, which changes yearly, they pay a property tax that gets locked in for a period of generally 20 years. So they still are paying taxes. It's just that instead of paying the annual increases generated from a tax, they normally have a locked in property tax rate, and because they're generating certain incentives involved. We have funding, of course, from the local government fund, where we get money from the pot set aside by state government. There's licenses and permits, charges for service, fees and fines, interest income. So all of these areas, we typically, me and my staff go through, delve through, look at the trend analysis to make projections for the various revenue categories. On the expenditure side, we have about 4 or 5 different categories of expenditures in which every general fund department falls into place. So either they're in the general government operations, which is the most of our departments. You also have some public safety. Obviously, you think about the sheriff department, EMS, detention center, and of course, public works departments. And then, of course, you have some health and social services. So each general fund department or expenditure will fall into either one of those categories. 50% of general fund budgeted dollars, roughly 50%, goes to public safety. As I said, there are several different public safety departments. There's, as I mentioned, sheriff department, detention center, EMS, I think animal control is part of that. I believe coroner's office. And so those are some of our different public safety departments. Enterprise funds, we just recently talked about. Again, they're supposed to be what mostly resembles private enterprise. We have 3 main ones: utilities, which for water and sewer. We have solid waste, and of course we have the airport. These, again, like Ms. Newton said, is she hit the nail right on the head. These should be funded entirely by user fees, and that's why revenue is so important. You have to be able to look at the revenue, and you should build your expenditure around what your revenue is. The last part is pretty important. The utility system does qualify for revenue bonds, but we must ensure the capacity to meet the debt covenant. So what that means is you can't just build just for operating expenditure. You got to make sure you have enough, not only in revenue coming in, not only to cover the operating expenditure. When I say operating, I'm meaning personnel operating expenditure, but also to cover your debt service. So you have to be able to maintain enough revenue to cover not only what you need to do on a day-to-day basis, but also to be able to repay the debt you may incur through CIP, that is capital improvement projects. Yeah, we went over this slide before. So you got, and I think Lori's going to pick up from this point.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
Yes, sir, Mr. Malinowski.
There we go. Before Mr. Hayes ends, you had mentioned the local government fund. The local government fund is something that was a very highly contested and debated item for several years. Is there now finally a formula in place that's going to be followed and counties will receive more of a proper funding than they have in the past?
I think I can answer that, and the short answer is not really.
Have we made
there has been a lobby on the part of both the Association of Counties and the Municipal Association, because there is very clear guidance in the state statute on how local governments should be funded. They have not been fully funded since 2008, which was during the recession. While I'm no legal expert, and I would never say that the state can't do something, because clearly they are, they're not living up to their standards, and the standards have not, the statute has not changed. But no, there is no clear indication that they are going to apply a new formula at this point.
Okay, well, I mean, they set the statute, the state did, and then they proceeded to violate it year after year after year. So
Yes, sir.
what about the unfunded mandates that we continue to get? Is there going to, have we as an individual county attempted to go to the state and get more funding for those unfunded mandates, or are we still at the point where we're stuck putting the state costs back on the county taxpayers?
Well, you know, that's kind of a double-edged sword. I've not personally been lobbying for that. I would love to get involved with the Association of Counties on those types of activities. I've been involved with the Municipal Association on some of those kinds of activities before, and I would welcome the opportunity to work with the Association of Counties on it. The unfortunate part there is many times they come down so quickly that even if you're able to react, by that time you're well out of budget. But no, and in fairness, we've also seen some reductions in their funding methodology for certain projects as well. So not only do we have funding mandates or unfunded mandates, but they will come in and begin to fund a project, but then reduce the funding. You know, for instance, some of the things that they require us, they're requiring to be done in the courts right now. There is no funding for it. So it's continual, but it's not something that doesn't go unnoticed. And certainly I would welcome it as an opportunity to try to lobby as we can to see if we can make any choices. I see 3 questions there, and I'm sorry, I don't know who came on first. Ms. Chairman Livingston, Ms. McBride, and Ms. Newton.
Ms. Thomas, if I could, one last thing. This is
Sure, I'm sorry.
This is where in the past, how we say that Richland County seems to always be reactive. I think we need to be proactive. And now at budget time, we need to have statements come out from the administrative staff through the public information office to let the public know why their taxes are where they are and why they could be lower if it weren't for the state and not following the laws that they passed. These are things the public needs to know. Not that we mention it during the budget meetings and maybe you've got 2% of the people happen to be paying attention to that. We need to get it out there. Thank you.
I completely agree. There's a very interesting piece of legislation right now that was brought to our attention by the Association of Counties on funding for police and sheriffs. And the piece of legislation as it's written would require that any government to fund a law enforcement agency at no less than 95% of prior year. So let's say that you found yourself in a recession and you needed to make some modifications quickly to be able to adapt, and that happened to be the only way that you had to. If that piece of legislation were to pass, that would tie our hands. So the association is certainly recognized that, and we're following it very closely. And I'll make certain that we keep a note of those kinds of things so that we can bring those to council as maybe as part of the administrator's report that he does on a regular basis.
Thank you.
If you think that would be helpful. Again, I'm not sure who, Mr. Malinowski, did I answer your questions?
Yes, I'm done. Ms. Thomas.
Okay, thank you, Thank you, sir.
Mrs.
Mr. Livingston, would you like to go now?
I was McBride was next, but I'll.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. McBride.
That Mr. Livingston can go ahead because
Well,
because yours might be related to Mr. Malinowski's question and mine is not.
It is.
Okay, go ahead.
Pretty much answered my question though, because I was concerned about whether or not we anticipated any current legislation is being discussed regarding unfunded mandates. And I'm just simply saying, if we're not, we need to make sure we pay close attention to what's being discussed now, so as we prepare the budget.
Ms. McBride.
But you probably answered my question though, when you mentioned.
Okay, Ms. Newton, was yours related to Mr. Malinowski? Because mine is different and I don't want to interrupt the floor. Of the
It is related and also quick, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, please.
Regarding lobbying, I just wanted to point out, more for the benefit of our new members probably, that at this point, Richland County doesn't have a lobbyist. So there's work that we can do on our own and relying on the Association of Counties. That was an item that there was an RFP that was issued. It might have been, I think it was in 2020, and council did not select that firm. So if that turns out to be a priority, that is something that we could pursue, but we don't currently have our own lobbyist that is proactively advocating for what our policy priorities are. Thank you, Ms. McBride, and thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Ms. McBride?
Yes, mine was going back to the enterprise funds.
Yes, ma'am.
And the utilities, because we use different companies with the utilities. Is that not correct? So if you could expound a little bit on the utilities part.
Are you talking about water and sewer, or
Yes,
about
for the
solid waste?
Well, water and sewer, but we're still under the enterprise funds, yeah.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Okay, on the utilities, we actually process all but about, I think, 1,400 of our sewer customers. There are still about 1,400 of the original City of Columbia customers that have to be switched over to our system. But once that happens, we will operate all of our own wastewater facilities and bill all of our own customers. Now, the water is a little bit different. We do buy that from the City of Columbia, but as I understand it, there are only about 1,400 customers.
Okay, so I just wanted clarification for everybody that with the city with the water that's from the City of Columbia.
Yes, ma'am.
And
that is correct.
And for the utilities, now we have Richland County as well as for the sewage.
The sewer, we're processing our sewer ourselves, with the exception of about 600 customers that we purchased from Richland County.
Okay, so we still.
And once the new sewer line in the south end is completed in Lower Richland, we will begin processing that as well.
Okay, and I thought that was important to know, because some of us are not, we don't work as close with the sewer as others. So I just wanted that distinction. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions?
Lori, I didn't have a question. I just want to briefly address the council. If you could mute your mic for me for a moment.
Certainly.
So we won't have the feedback. So this particular area, I want to just touch bases on and let you know that during the process that we've gone through with all the departments, we work with several agencies who are, I would say, sister agencies that maybe have some level of state involvement, who may receive funding from the state. And as we go through this budget process and you have this general awareness, one of the things that you all have just pointed out and talked about, unfunded mandates. Lori talked about funding that is being reduced from the state side, in addition to maybe unfunded mandates. And I just want you to consider that some of the conversations when it comes to budget, and when we were asking, okay, here's a request that you have of Richland County. Can you talk to me about the request that you made from the state? Some departments had not made additional requests to the state because they said that they know that the state is already either not going to pay more, or they're actually reducing in some particular areas. And so from their perspective, it came across to us as, well, we expect to be able to carry this information to Richland County, and for you to do something about it, even though we have identified that we have needs and we are maybe dually funded or partially funded by the state. So I just bring that to your attention, because I just think as part of our conversation, I want you to know that in terms of individuals' expectations of the county versus the state, it seems that as though there's more of a hold your feet to the fire, if you will, from the county side than our neighboring jurisdictions with the state. So that's all I have. Thank you, members of council and Lori.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. I completely agree with the statement that you made. So if there's nothing further, I'll sort of talk about what we see as some of the goals of the budget that we're putting together. And one is to make sure that we're able to accurately budget and pay the cost that are required to operate the county daily, to the expectations of the citizens, to meet all of our statutory obligations, whether it be pension plans, of course, tax liability for employees, and all of our debt service, as well as our debt covenants, to align our spending goals with that of the county, and to ensure the sustainability of the county in the event of unexpected circumstances. Sorry, for some reason, I'm having a difficult time moving my screen down here. So I also wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that we need to consider as we're considering, as we're talking about sustainability, about what could happen that would make us have to come up with an emergency response. Cyber criminals. If we were to have some sort of a cyber attack, granted, we have some cyber liability insurance. However, the cost of a cyber attack could be very great. It could also impact the daily operations, and we might have to make accommodation for operating in a different way, which would have costs associated with it. Internet sales tax. Here we have to be cognizant of changes in federal and state laws. If you recall, back in 2018, the Supreme Court actually supported the states' abilities to collect internet sales, and the counties and the states saw a windfall that year. As a matter of fact, I found an article where Richland County, for the state of South Carolina, in 1 year it collected over $47 million. But as internet sales shift into high gear, as we've seen in the last year, it's a voluntary requirement for people to actually register to submit those taxes to the state. So if they don't do that, and if it's caught in an audit, we could see a windfall, and we have to recognize that. So we would be keeping our eyes on either changing legislation with regard to internet sales tax, or with regard to windfall taxes that may come in, and we would need to recognize that as a one-time revenue coming into to not included in our projections. State and federal revenue program changes, as we just talked about, unfunded mandates, programs in the transit area where administration currently supports fully. If there were to be a change in economic condition, the state or the federal government can change any one of those rules that would have an impact on our sustainability. Tourism revenues. I feel like everything goes back to this last year. Both a recession and a pandemic, as we know, can certainly have an impact on tourism revenues and our abilities to support others outside of just our operating group. Keep in mind that every year from the hospitality tax, the county should receive about $3 million that goes to the general fund. So that would be something that could be in jeopardy. A recession. 2008 seems like just a few days ago, but it was 12 years ago. And unfortunately, the economy is a cyclical animal. So we have to keep our eyes wide open to what may be coming down the lines. Now, right now, all of the economists and some of those and some of the entities, I heard the Fed, we had started to see some inching in interest rates, but I did hear today that the Fed plans to hold interest rates at least through the next 12 months at this point in time. But beyond that, we could be looking at interest rate increases, which are not necessarily a bad thing, but it would certainly have an impact on spending habits. That a recession is something that will happen again, and we just have to be prepared, and we hope it's not to the extent of 2008. Catastrophic conditions. 2015 was just around the corner too, and while I wasn't with Richland County, we're still seeing the aftermath of the floods that happened here. So something to that effect could happen again. And then, of course, our favorite, the pandemic, the gift that just keeps giving. Who thought, I remember it was a year ago last Sunday, driving home with my husband, and the governor coming on the radio and saying that we were closing down. And I said, well, it's no big deal. We'd be open in 2 weeks. Well, a year later, we're still dealing with this. And it certainly has an impact on the way that we do business. So these are just a few of the items that I've seen just in my career that I wanted to point out as things that could that we need to have to keep in mind as we're considering sustainability. So to give you an idea, I know we're climbing up on the end of the hour, and I won't belabor this. This was our last year. This was our 2020 general fund spend. And the percentages and division of expenses, the largest of which is personnel and operating expenses. Yes, sir, Mr. Livingston. Mr. Livingston?
I could wait until you finish.
Oh, okay.
Lori, you're on mute. You're on mute. Can't hear you.
All right, sorry about that. And then followed by capital outlay, which is very minimal. We probably need to look at investing more in our capital to protect our assets. Included in the operating expenditures are $3.892 million in lump sum distributions.
Lori, I want to go ahead and just give a point of clarification on that real quick so they understand.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, so just real quick, briefly, because I didn't want the council to be confused about the $3.892 million in lump sum distribution. Now, I know you all have heard the term with the lump sum appropriation. The general fund has several different categories in terms of lump sum distributions. Three primarily. There's the lump sum appropriations amount, but that was not 3.892 last year. Last year, that was about 2.1 million. Then there's also the discretionary grant program, which is 200,000. But we also have a huge program in terms of the contractual statutory. There are three groups that we have contractual statutory arrangements with to pay every year. And that, of course, is the Central Midlands COG City Center Partnership and Lorraine Act, which is passed through. And those amounts were a little over $1 million. So I just didn't want anybody to have a heart attack that was all money from lump sum appropriations. But 2.1 last year was lump sum appropriations. The other one would be CNS. And we also had, and last year also was different because 618,000 was 612,000, excuse me, was from COVID relief funds when we paid out through the grant program that we had, and also through assisting senior resources. So all of that went into the 3.892 million. So I just wanted to give that point of clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, do you want to ask your question now?
Unmute myself here. Most years during the budget process, there's a couple of items that really kind of drives the budget. You know, for example, you may have a big insurance amount coming about. You may have salaries trying to adjust, technology. Do we have anything that's huge this time that's really driving the budget?
Yes, sir. I'll attempt to answer that, Lori. So, yes, sir, Mr. Chair, and I spoke to you briefly about this. I don't know if you recall, but I think there are really three main drivers this year that we would like to address. We certainly have to take a look and see what the revenue ultimately looks like, and then where county council is going to come in on some of the department requests. But I think number one, and I would say we have to invest in our technology infrastructure. Even pre-COVID, these are conversations that I was having with our internal staff for whatever number of reasons that we are just outdated on our technology. And in some respects, our technology infrastructure. We've made some initial investments this past year. Council may remember, and if you don't, I'll just say thank you, we did. And then we need to continue to build on that. And the pandemic showed us why, because we would not be able to do some of the things that we're doing right now with the majority of our staff, because we don't have the technology infrastructure that allows for these types of meetings that we're having now very broadly throughout the county. The other area, sir, that I would say is we have to also continue to focus on our utilities infrastructure. As we talked about, and when I say that, what I mean by that is addressing both utilities as an enterprise fund and addressing our public works section as a utilities fund with a solid waste, because we have to address those operating on their own and not pulling from the general fund. And the third area is there are some personnel areas, and I'm not talking about a broad sweep, even though I would remind previous members on council that my understanding is that there was a TRS, or the Total Rewards Program, that was started, and there was an initial investment that was made, but we have not made subsequent investments. Separate and apart from that, there are some personnel items that I have identified where I believe we should focus our specific energy to address. That includes public safety, but specifically under the public safety umbrella, that would be EMS, and in some respects, the detention center. So there was actually an article that came out that I did not realize was going to come out before I had a chance to speak with council. But the reality of it is there are some known budgeting, I would say, gaps between how we have funded some of those agencies. So we can have a more deep dive conversation about that later, but there are certainly some opportunities there, Mr. Livingston. So I would say those three are things that I have identified along with my team. Certainly willing to hear any direction from council, but from the administrator standpoint, infrastructure for technology, enterprise funds, stabilization, and then personnel, specifically with a focus on public safety, with an internal emphasis on detention center and EMS, with EMS being priority, followed by some assessment of detention center, sir.
Thank you. Do we have we're not expecting a spike in insurance this time?
Ooh, I might have to have Lori come back in for that conversation. My understanding, Mr. Livingston, is that we may be able to withstand the spike, but my understanding is that insurance providers have been hinting for the last 12 months that because of COVID, things were going to increase, much like you heard other potential things that have increased. I'm suspecting that there's a projected increase related to our insurance coverage. And I will say to the group that's on this call, because you asked, that one of the things that Lori has been doing is we have been looking at whether or not it's time for us to reevaluate the plan that we're on and consider other alternatives. We may be doing that this year, Mr. Livingston. We might be kind of pushed to the brink to do it as soon as the budget cycle. But if not this year, sir, we definitely going to need to do that next year. So that would be something that's on our radar now, regardless of whether or not we're able to make a change this year. I'm going to be asking the council for us to really thoroughly vet a potential move associated with our health plan.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Lori, did you want to address whether or not you have any insight? I know Mr. Hannah's not on right now. Any insight as to what we are projecting concerning our current insurance premiums for this upcoming year? All right, I don't see Lori on, so Mr. Chair, we'll follow up on that. But again, what I said, it certainly holds. We are visiting that. And we do think there may be an increase from what we're hearing associated with health claims and health insurance.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yes, Mr. Livingston, the initial indications are we're looking at double-digit increase in our health insurance. I also point out that on our other lines of insurance, it's also been a very difficult year in the markets there. And we're probably looking at 15 to 18% on our other insurance lines, related to liability and things of that nature. I see, Mr. Livingston, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I wish I wouldn't have asked it though now. Thank you.
Ms. Newton, I believe you have a question, and then Ms. Mackey.
Yes, thank you. Going back to Mr. Hayes and your comments about the lump sum appropriations, and because I'm not looking at it, I'll have to process what you were talking about in terms of organizations like LARADAC, et cetera. But I guess I just wanted you to confirm my impression when it comes to the discretionary lump sum allocations. My impression is that in years past, there's amount of money that's budgeted for in the budget for those appropriations, but that there's been a trend towards borrowing additional funds from other sources to add more to that pot. So is that a correct interpretation of how we operated in the past, or is there any additional clarity you can provide on that and recommendations?
Go ahead, James.
Councilwoman Newton, to answer your question, yes, historically there has been an amount set aside for lump sum appropriations, but historically that amount has been exceeded through council motions, either I guess funding additional groups or giving groups that are currently funded additional funds. But yeah, you're correct. Those things have routinely exceeded what's been budgeted.
And besides not doing that, any other budgetary recommendations that you might have in terms of how we might treat that funding source or expenditure source moving forward?
Well, I'll let the administrator speak to that, of course.
Yes, so Ms. Newton, Mr. Hayes got away from that one. So the idea there is we certainly have identified that there are a lot of needs that are out there. The county has operational needs, and we have dollars that we need to allocate to address those operational needs and balance that with the dollars that we use to address any other needs that are out there as well. So our recommendation would be for us to be aware of those additional funding that we're allocating outside of operations to determine, have we met our initial threshold for core services before we have any additional funding that we're putting out, so that we're not borrowing against future dollars and not able to support our current operations.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Ms. Mackey, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. I just wanted to know, and I don't know if it's internal best practices or if there is something else you've seen at state level or national level for best practices. When you look at the percentage breakdown of the general fund and having, personnel over 75%, is that in line with best practices?
I can get you some numbers on that specifically. What I would say is that a county's percentage of personnel is going to be more than that of a municipality. And municipality is where I come out of, and normally ours was in the 70% range. And that's because the counties support more operations. A good, for example, is the treasurer, the clerk of court, all of those kinds of things. We don't have, a municipality doesn't have those kinds of things, but I will get you some benchmark numbers on that so that you guys will have some ideas if you'd like.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. McBride? Ms. McBride, did you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
No problem.
It takes me a while to unmute. I would like to follow up with Ms. Newton's question and Mr. Brown's response in terms of lump sums and the ability our council adding different programs to the budget. It should be noted that we always stay within our reserve funds. Is that not right, Mr. Hayes? We don't overexpend those funds when it's done.
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand your question. Yeah, well, typically that's where the excess funding has come from to cover, since it's gone over budget. It has come from the fund balance. If that answers your question.
within the fund balance, we have a certain amount that we do not exceed. We always keep a certain amount of reserve funds. Is that not?
Oh, okay. I see where you're going at now. Yeah, well, that is correct. That typically what council has done in the past is, based off the amount of cushion we have between to stay within the GFOA guidelines. Council has used that access to fund some lump sum. So yes, you're correct. That has been a pattern in the past. You're correct.
So normally we follow a best practice in staying within the the GFOA guidelines.
Well, I would answer that by saying, in terms of staying within your GFOA fund balance percentage, you're correct. But on a previous slide that I think Lori showed, that it's not best practice to use non-recurring dollars to fund a recurring expenditure.
Right, and so it's two things. We're following best practice, but there is in some areas there's some concerns about the non-reoccurring dollars. But the bottom line I want to make, a point I'm trying to make is that, and I said it in the beginning, the administration submits a budget to us for approval. Actually, council does not do a lot of priority setting. So sometimes this is an opportunity where there are some priorities that we recommend because we didn't get the opportunity to do the priority setting for different programs. So that's when we make the recommendations at that time. And these are usually programs that benefit our constituents. And that is the reason I believe that it's not done. For my 4 years that I've never really participated in a priority setting for budget. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the next slide? Okay, we wanted to talk a little bit about human resources, and Mr. Livin, I'm going to jab you just a little bit more. We do see that 76.5% of the expenditures in the general fund are related to human resources. Of course, 7.65% of it's Social Security and Medicare, and those are statutory. Our retirement is statutory also because we do participate in the state retirement system and the police officers retirement system with the state as well. This year, it was 15.56% for the state retirement system, which is your non-sworn officers plan. On your sworn officers, detention guards, those actually are at 18.4%, and those will increase 1% each next fiscal year. And again, in the following fiscal year, if you remember a few years ago, South Carolina PEBA went in and set some guidelines because they were underperforming in their fund investments. And we will be seeing the effects of those for the next 2 years. So you're going to see a 1% increase in those each of those numbers over the next 2 years. And then our dental, health, and vision insurance represents 13.25% of total personnel spend. So our recommendation is to focus on cost evaluations and personnel related to expenditures. Mr. Brown mentioned some of the things that we're looking at already. We'll be coming to you with some more recommendations on those kinds of things. We also recommend to prioritize our budgeting to allow us for investment in our existing assets. There's a lot of deferred maintenance out there, and much of that deferred maintenance are on areas that actually bring in revenue. And if we defer the maintenance much longer on that, the assets may become worth less than they actually are. So we never want that to happen. So those are our recommendations moving forward. With that, that's all I have for you today. Myself and Director Hayes have worked very hard to put this together, and we hope it's been beneficial. We would welcome any comments that you have for us. Let us know if you like this format. If you don't, if you'd like to have more of these. Right now we have 3 others that are available. However, if there's not an interest, we'd certainly want to know that as well. The way we have them structured right now is that next Thursday we would be addressing the general fund. next Friday, the enterprise funds, and then the following week, I believe on Thursday, we would be looking at special revenue funds. And we had done that off the doodle poll that we had put out last week. That is what met the most, the times that were the best for individuals. So are there any further questions? If not, Ms. Newton, I'll turn it back over to you.
Ms. Hayes, I mean.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Thomas.
Mr. Malinowski?
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Hayes. Well, maybe you can answer it. I know you weren't here when this happened, though. Mr. Hayes, this council passed, 2-3 years ago to begin charging a fee for services for those entities, certain entities that do not pay taxes to the county, but have their businesses, if you would call it such, within the county. For example, if the state has an office somewhere in the unincorporated area of the county and they call for emergency assistance from EMS, fire department, law enforcement, they get response, but they're not paying taxes, but that response is actually costing the taxpayer additional monies. So the council, in reviewing all this a few years ago, decided, yes, we need to charge a fee for services, and somebody was supposed to be trying to determine, well, what is the fee out of the taxes paid that actual residents are paying? And that fee was supposed to be passed along to those agencies not paying taxes. Has that ever been done? Or is it another thing?
Mr. Malinowski, I do recall those conversations with council, but to be quite honest with you, I actually didn't know that you all passed it. But and to my knowledge, I'm not even sure if it has been implemented. C.A. Brown may have some information on that, or certainly I can follow up with Director Ham. But I do recall you all discussing it, but I actually didn't know that it was fully implemented by council.
It was my understanding that it was, and it was former Councilman Manning that came up with one exception to that, and that was, I think, the school districts, because we kind of pay a lot in there anyway, that they would be one of the accepted groups. So yeah, I'd appreciate if you looked into that, because I think we're maybe losing some revenues there. That's all.
Yeah, I'll get with administration and Director Ham to get some information for you.
Thank you.
If there aren't any, Ms. McBride,
Yeah.
see your hand.
I want to thank you for providing this session, you and Mr. Hayes. One of the concerns I have is that I think it should be part of our work session for the budget session, where everyone would have the opportunity to participate based on this is something that we know we have to do, and it's not elective like this one. I think it's so important to get this information out, and there were some people not able to participate. But Mr. Livingston, as a part of our regular council sessions or part of the regular work session, I think these types of programs give more people, more council persons, the opportunity to participate. And I know with Mr. Rubel with the Economic Development Committee, we did one, but this is something that is directly for the full council. And I think that it's important that you take it to that level where all council persons will be in attendance.
I support you on that, Ms. McBride.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski.
Ms. McBride, thank you for bringing that up. And when we were putting these together, and part of these, as you recall, we talked about this if you may recall, we talked about some of this during the workshop, during the retreat, and I talked about us having more of these opportunities. So this is not in place of doing this for full council in those scheduled budget workshops. This is an additional opportunity for members to participate. So we expect that during those workshops, there will be information that is shared like this before we get into the details and the back and forth of the workshop. But this was an additional opportunity because, as you've identified, we find value and want to build effectively so that those workshops work really well for you, and that members have opportunities for us to go into the workshop with certain questions that we can ask and have answered and available for others in the overall workshop. So thank you for your acknowledgement of full council needing to participate or be available for this. And just know that this is an additional opportunity that we were trying to provide for the benefit of those who may not want to wait to the workshop to find out these types of things and then feel like the workshop is not the appropriate time for them to ask additional questions. So thank you again very much. I just wanted to make sure that you all were well aware of that. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, I appreciate that, but oftentimes we get so much going on in those meetings that I know this additional workshop, but I think it should have been a main one because it's so important. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. Ms. Mackey, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted to say, as a new council member, I appreciate these sessions and being able to, you guys breaking it down into bite-sized chunks for us to understand. And I think this will be a great tool as we move into those budget workshops. Being able to have this knowledge ahead of time helps me as a new council member to be better prepared for those workshops and to participate accordingly. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
I'd just like to thank you for the slides. Even if someone who wasn't able to participate, I think it'd be very helpful for them to just have the presentation. So that was good.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Anyone else? Well, if there are no other comments, I really do appreciate the time. I know we ran over by about a half hour, but we do appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us. Ms. Newton, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. And just to confirm, Ms. Mackey, did you have an additional question that you was raised?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Then we'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to adjourn. Will you call the roll, please, Ms. Black?
All right, Malinowski,
Yes.
Pugh, McBride, Livingston, Teratio, Mackey,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again.